Okay, everybody, welcome to the first panel discussion we have at PyGrunn. After 5 years of discussing what else to do during PyGrunn, we finally came up with something, which is the panel discussion. Mostly led by Berko. He will do the introduction on the topic. But also on the table today, or on the floor today, is Henk Doornbos, head of tech boss thingy, of PayLogic. Also the CTO of SFX, all the way from America to here. Just had his lunch, so it might be a bit slow in the beginning, but he'll catch up. Armin Ronacher, here for the 5th time in a row, celebrating his birthday in the Netherlands. 5th time in a row he's here, and he's here with his wife, Maria.
Well done. Welcome back. Welcome back.
And finally, Remco, beer enthusiast, music enthusiast, and also Python enthusiast. So these are the guys today.
Okay.
Berko.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, Sietse. As Sietse said, this is new, doing a panel here, and it's a triad for, okay, does this format work or not? And there's one thing that I thought this is the right time to do a panel at PyLogic, because there's one topic that's been on my mind for actually a very long time. And I see more and more signs of this topic becoming more important over time. I thought, well, this is the audience that is really relevant for this discussion, and it's also probably very can add to the discussion. And the idea of this panel is to discuss this topic openly, so everybody in the room should just shout through it. It should be one big discussion. It's us here because I've invited these guys because I'm convinced, I know these guys are very interesting and very creative and original thinkers when it comes to not only software and IT, big IT systems, but bigger problems as well, bigger opportunities as well. So that's why I invited them. So we can get along, we can discuss this stuff all night, especially if there's beer involved, but I'd like you all to join in this as well. I'm going to give a little introduction about the topic itself, where it came from and why we think it's an important thing to discuss. It might not immediately seem relevant for a PyGrunn conference, but trust me, it is. It is. But you'll be convinced at the end of this talk. We have 2 slots actually for this discussion, so we have some time to discuss this stuff. But if we're finished early, we're finished early. If not, we can continue the discussion outside with beer or later tonight. I'm sure you'll be intrigued by the topic, and you'll hopefully start following what we have been doing and we will be doing in the future. So this is an initial attempt in this topic to get something started, to get something rolling, and I'd like to continue this effort after PyGrunn, and whether it's with you or people outside the Python community, it doesn't really matter. Anybody who's interested and feels the same need to do something about this topic, to act instead of wait and see what happens, is cordially invited to join us and join the discussion. The scope of it is actually quite massive, but that's what makes it interesting. So I'd like to, although the scope of the topic itself is quite massive, I'd like to put a little extra stress on what it means in IT and in IT business, what topics play there that are related and that we can discuss. Well, the panelists, Sietse, thanks for inviting them. Sietse will host the documentation. I'll just join the panel in a second after my initial talk. For me, where it all started is these 2 books. Oh, you can't read it, right? Maybe you can read my slides like this. Is it a bit readable?
Yeah.
It's William Gibson's Neuroman. Who read it? Who read Neuromancer? William Gibson, who read. Excellent book. It's one of the best books. Actually, it was for me a pivoting moment when it comes to my personal decision to go into the field of IT and building big, complex distributed systems. Another one is by David Lerner's Mirror Worlds. Has anybody have read that small book? It's quite a small book. It's very interesting indeed. Now, the idea behind Mirror Worlds is how do you create a world that's a mirror of the physical reality that we see around you? How does say that everything is represented, every physical thing that you see around you, how if you represent it in a digital realm, what would such a digital representation look like in the end? Would it be like a matrix kind of environment? Would it like mimic like a real world, or would it be like some completely new conceptual world, or what? And how my PhD thesis was about the question: if you create such a world, how would you navigate it? How would you make it so that people would understand such a world and can do something with it? That was at the end of the 90s that I did my PhD in this topic. These 2 books were at the beginning of the 90s, where they planted the seed in my head, and I've been thinking about, okay, how could you in a network that has increasingly more physical objects attached to it, how can you represent these objects, and how would you build such a system? And how do you avoid big problems in these systems? Because there are problems, and I'll dive into those. So after these books, things got along, and Gibson's and Glunt's vision slowly came into focus because we got the internet, and the internet started to grow, and it became more complex and more fine-grained, and the connections. And an increasing number of entities were connected to this network, so you could access these entities in an increasing, well, the physical world was represented more and more in the digital realm, if you want to put it like that. So that went over time, and as we see now, it's easy to access, well, whether it's a computer as a server at the other side of the world, or it's some kind of, if it's a car, or it's another entity that you want to address, like for instance a Nest thermostat, or it's an, I don't know, always the same example, like refrigerators or whatever it is. More and more physical objects are addressable through this digital realm, are represented there. So we're getting there slowly but surely. Certainly with the latest things like the AR, the Oculus Rift movement, the hype that it generated, and certainly there is something happening in there, like whether it's augmented reality, where you augment the real physical reality with some digital layer, or whether these physical reality entities are represented in your digital world. It's the same story from both perspectives. But there's something going on. There's a lot of change in there, and there's a lot happening at the moment. But if you look where we're going, I think that we got ourselves in trouble. It seems that we increasingly depend on centralized systems. And for me personally, what happens, for instance, I had been using ICQ for a very long time, then ICQ quit, and they went bankrupt, and then it was gone, and my data was, all my chats were gone, and then I started using Google Buzz, and then Google just decided, well, why support Buzz anymore? So I just removed it, and then I used Google Reader, and then I quit Google Reader, and I use Facebook, and I can't access my Facebook anymore, and now using Google Plus, and there's a lot in there, and I'm not in control, and now it seems that somebody is spying on my data somewhere, because it's all centralized, and it's all very prone to all kinds of issues. So I have been, with my personal communication, with my history, with my data, I've been susceptible to privacy issues, to security issues, and I'm vulnerable actually, because a lot of my private life, a lot of my ideas, a lot of my discussions that I have are in centralized servers of either Amazon or Google or Facebook or whatever it is, and all the data. And then I think, I don't know what the ratio is, but I think quarter of all internet traffic goes through Amazon servers nowadays. And that's a horrifying thing, but it's very easy if somebody wants to spy on it. There's a few spots in the world where you have to tap off and you get almost all the data that you need. I would say that's really, really, really problematic. The things that we've seen with the NSA over the last couple of years have shown that that really is a problem, and it can really work against you, and there's no signs of improving it yet. So the question is, could you address the people that misuse these centralized systems, or should you build something differently that avoids these situations? Because the problems are real. For me personally, they are real, but for a society, they are a real need. And they'll only become worse and worse and worse. I recently read a study about a guy that did some research into a hospital. So the hospital asked this guy, who was a security expert, said, well, just go through your hospital and see what you can access. Right? Try to break things and see what you can access to. And this guy couldn't get access to heart rate monitors. They could change like the insulin pumps on that. So they could actually break into systems and give people like shocks, and so they would die. And there were Windows computers over there for controlling Röntgen, I don't know the English word, but X-ray machines and that, so they get the legal dose, etc. Anything was accessible and open, and they used Bluetooth stacks that had security issues from 10 years back and still wouldn't patch, etc. So the problem is then the physical reality is also more and more depending on what is becoming an IT network of industry system. But these IT systems, if they become really centralized, then it's very easy to access the physical network as well. And then that's the moment I would say that the problems become really big. Until now, I mean, getting access to my chat history on Facebook, well, that's a bit annoying, but it becomes really annoying. Somebody can access my heart monitor if I'm in the hospital. Somebody can break or do something else, or you can turn out all the lights in the city. Or, I mean, you can imagine all the problems that can happen at them. But it's a realistic problem. It can happen. And one of the reasons that they can happen is that a lot of these things become more and more centralized. So the question here is, how acceptable is that? Because centralized system leads to distributed problems. Quote by Hank actually, which would really struck a chord with me. That really is a problem that that you see over and over again. That's what this talk is about. It's worth repeating. Centralized systems lead to distributed problems in the end. So we really need to think whether centralization is worth with the issue. Now, centralization is a problem that happens in a lot of domains. It's not that they only happen in IT and big IT systems. On many abstract levels, you can think about it, and you can see centralization going on, and you can think about the problems it solves, but also the problems it causes. You can look at the data layer, you can look at code itself, software, you can look at application layers, you can look at organizationals, how do organizations work indeed, how do nations work, and last but not least, what kicked off for me is how does the Internet of Things work, and how does centralization play a role in that, and what will be the consequences if you centralize efforts in there, and are they acceptable or not. I'll dive into these different layers, and then we'll get in more depth about it. For instance, talking about data. An example is centralization of data. We have S3, Amazon S3, of course. We have iCloud from Apple. We have Dropbox. We have Google Drive. And you can mention a couple more. There are many examples, but taken all together and think about how many of these data faults there are actually not that many. If you look at the number of data centers around the world, that's not that many. If you look at the number of real fat data pipes between these data centers, there's only a few of them. So they are really centralized systems to accessing your data. I remember for Paylogic, we had to, was coincidentally, we were thinking of, well, we want to maybe store all our data in Amazon Web Services. I mean, we weren't thinking about these problems yet. We were thinking about, okay, we're going to store it in Amazon Web Services because that's easy to do. But it turned out that it's from a Dutch company, it's illegal to do so, because if you put it in the server of an American company, there's an act, the Patriot Act, that says that the American government can access your data at any moment if they want to. That would break all our certifications, so we were not even able to do so. We're storing it on our own servers now. But there's a lot of drive, a lot of companies to think, okay, let's store everything as S3. That's why about a quarter of all traffic in the world and a quarter of all data is in Amazon servers now. Really centralized. It's happening. Apple is coming along with their clouds, but it's still a very limited set of options you have. So there's a few days where it's in, and it makes attacking, as we have seen by NSA, backdoors built in, it makes it really easy and really viable to do so. And trust me, these guys are smarter than anybody else on the planet. If they can access it, they'll break it and they'll get it. But the question is, the key point here in this is that if they can access it, and that's the question. That's the thing we need to address, I think. So the consequences is that indeed your personal data is only accessible through centralized networks. Not only that your data is sitting somewhere centralized with all other data, it's also the fact that if you want to access your data, you have to go through only a very limited number of entrance points, which are provided by companies such as Google, and they might decide that they're not going to offer the service of accessing your data anymore because, well, Google Bus doesn't make a good business model anymore, or some other system goes bankrupt, or they lose their credit, or the security policy is not what you actually expected from them. That's a really big problem, I would say. So you're not in control anymore of your own data in the end. What happened to your data at ICQ, Google, Reader, Buzz, Wave, as I said, MySpace, Hive, Dropbox, it's all gone because of company policy and how these big centralized companies and systems work. It's one of the consequences, and they're real. Another domain is when you look at code. An example is huge centralized monolithic code bases. Code that's all wrapped together in one big bowl, and then example are GitHub themselves, or Bitbucket if you want them. These are really centralized systems for where they contain a lot of code, but you can also look at, if you just take one project, one big project with highly intermingled and coupled subsystem is really problematic. If you have code that's really monolithic and big, you will run into problems. It's hard to maintain, it's hard to reason about, it's hard to understand, it's hard to maintain, it's hard to think about security issues it might bring along. So even at the code level, there's a lot of issues with centralizing and making one big thing out of it. It might seem interesting from the beginning on, but along the way, you'll run into problems. These problems are for real as well. I recently, coincidentally, read Ned Batchelder, he's a cool guy from, that's his name, right? Batchelder? Yeah. From the Python community. He's an interesting guy. He said, GitHub is great. I mean, we all use it, and it's a really excellent tool, but we should really consider using other tools on the side as well, because it's really becoming a centralized place for all your not only your code, but your whole community, your whole workflow for all your communication, also the social and all other aspects of your life. You might want to reconsider whether you want to depend on something like that for such an important thing. Another level, so one level up, not code, but looking at applications, you get to the same thing back again. And an interesting aspect here in the Netherlands, an example is the electronic health record or electronic patiënten dossier. That's a project been going on for 8 decades, I believe. It's a huge centralized, there's many hospitals involved, many IT companies involved, and they're trying to make one big system out of that. Like everybody uses this one record, and it's stored in a certain way at a certain place, and it's controlled by, but it's a very much centralized thought. This company stores the data, these hospitals use it, this is the one this is the company that tracks the security, etc., etc. It's very much centrally organized. Another application is, of course, social media. If you look at Facebook or any other social medium, it's centralized. It's one company offering the service. They store the data for you. You're depending on their application. It's one big centralized application that gives you access to your actually in the end your data and your online life. So your social fabric starts to depend on these companies as well. I mean, I'm not exaggerating anything. For many people, it's again that a big part of the social life is depending on the tools that Facebook offers them. And if Facebook all of a sudden would turn evil, and a lot of people would be in big trouble, I would think. And honestly, it is possible, and it's not unthinkable whether that would happen. If Facebook shares would go down dramatically, like happened with Hives, for instance, which totally disappeared. It's not unthinkable that a company, and a company has no moral, when you look at it, can make the wrong decisions for, in the end user. It might happen. It's not unthinkable. So the question is, what happens and what could you do about it? Next level up, development of software itself is also prone to centralization. Centrally managed software projects, if you look at big software projects, and there's tons of examples here in the Netherlands, they fail miserably. I don't have the numbers with that, but there was a recent article on research in the Dutch industry. What amount of government-based big software projects failed, and I think it was 90%, I believe, he said. But at least it's all, basically, I mean, the other ones have been lying, let's say that they all fail. And one of the big reasons that they all fail is because they try to approach it in a very centralized manner. So what they try to do is a lot of control, a lot of power into very centralized spots in society. But the older I get, the more I realize that nobody can handle power in these big projects. It's no way that such a small team can handle such a massive amount of power. It's undoable. Nobody can handle that for many reasons, because it puts a lot of ethical, on one hand, it puts a moral demand on you as a person, but also it's also a lot of work, and it's also too much for some small set of people. So they will fail. Centrally managed huge software projects, I don't know one that has really succeeded over the last decades. And the Dutch government is losing billions per year, really billions per year, on the fact that they still don't realize it. They keep trying. If you look at werk.nl, which is a big site, it costs over half a billion by now. It's a website, still doesn't work. And everybody knows it's the biggest shame in history, and it's a website that doesn't work, and they can't get it to work. They spent $500 million on it. It's a crazy amount of money, but it shows the fact it's undoable. These things are so complex, and so much power distribution. If you think about the whole project itself, that it's not possible to centralize that and steer it properly. It will not work in the end. The Beehive principle, basically, check it out. It's about the same thing. If you look at organizations, and you can see the same thing coming along as well. If you look at Microsoft and Nokia, famous examples of companies that started off as small companies, guys in the garage, built some stuff, into really these huge companies that are very huge hierarchies and very well-defined structures. But still, in the end, it's a pyramid. There's somebody in the top that has the power. And what happens over time, the top of the companies, they lose contact with reality. In the end, they make the wrong decisions. They put Steve Ballmer in control, and down goes the company in the end. It doesn't work. I mean, systems that big with so much, they are so diverse and have so much to do, don't work in a centralized manner. At least you can try it. You can try for a long time. Maybe they'll last for 50 years, maybe 100, but then they're gone. They can't scale. It scales up to a certain point, and then the fact that they're centralized will start working against them. Nokia is another fine example. Started out as a they made rubber boots, and they started to grow, and they became more successful, and they started into telecom, and they started building phones, and it went on and on and on. But at a certain point in time, they were market leader, and every phone, they made like a new phone every minute, but somehow the people at the top were missing what was happening in the industry. And what was happening is that smartphone phones were coming along. People that didn't run on the Symbian OS or the J2ME that Nokia was providing. So the alternatives were there, but the head of Nokia, these guys, they didn't see it happening. They didn't take it seriously. They missed the boat, and in the end, the whole company went almost down. I would say it's being bought by Microsoft, but their value is really close to zero, I would say. Centralization doesn't, organizational, another examples, of course, are the is Europe itself. I mean, is it wise to approach Europe as a centralized continent, all right? Like they did in the US, like have 52 states and make one machine out of it. There's a lot of doubt and a lot of discussion about it, whether that will be feasible at all. I don't have to mention the example of Russia at the moment, how that went and what happened there. It's obvious there's problems there. So you can, as you said, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire is another great example of things go AHOC, AWOL there, and USSR, as I said as well. And the problems to mention there as a result of centralization are just too many to mention. And lastly, what I kicked it off, and which is I think maybe even the biggest story here, is if you look at the Internet of Things, what happens if this Internet of Things will happen, if all these physical entities will be connected to the network, what happens if control and access to that Internet of all these physical entities will be centralized? If there's one company that has really a lot of power in you accessing the physical reality, they'll basically start influencing you with the way you can access your physical reality. Now that's, for me, that was like the real alarm bell going, well, this must be something done. And interestingly enough, recently, Apple, who's not known for their best, I would say the best moral in this industry, announced their, of course, they announced a new iPhone and announced a new iPad. But one thing they didn't really announce, but it was, for me, the biggest sign on the wall, they announced their iBeacon. Now, the iBeacon is a thing that you stick on the wall somewhere in your shop. It's a small device. It's about this big, and you stick it on the wall. And if somebody with an iPhone passes along, there's a near-field Bluetooth communication stack. It pings, and say, wow, Berko's in the store. He likes jeans. Well, let's give him a new offer. But the thing is, if this iBeacon starts pinging, then he knows, okay, Berko, this guy is in this store. He owns an iPhone 5. I have his iTunes account. I know his shopping history. Now, if Berko wants to buy something, then he has to go to using his iTunes account, through these iBeacons, using his iPhone. So what you see is that Apple is really trying to get a hold on this physical infrastructure as well. Now, that is really scary to me. And if you look at the recent acquisition of, for instance, the Nest thermostat, it's being bought by Google. But it's the next step for the companies. And as I said, the company doesn't have any moral. They just want to get as much grip on you and on the network, so that whatever happens in the network, they can mine the data that's being generated, they can mine the behavior that's being done there, and use it for commercial purposes. There's nothing wrong with that, don't get me wrong, but we shouldn't trust in this company to have any moral to do it right. I mean, Apple will grab as much of the pie as possible, so will Google, and it will happen. Them buying Nest is a perfectly example that they're trying to get a grasp of the physical infrastructure, which means they control the way that you can access your physical reality in the future. And once you do so, and if you want to have some influence then on that, you have to go through their systems and through their data and to your profile that's stored in their system. I think that's one of the, looking like 20 years up front, maybe 30 or 40 years into the future, you can wonder for a question, how acceptable is that? Is that what we want? I mean, should we maybe think of alternatives? So the question becomes, what is the cause of this centralization? Why is this happening? I think there's a lot to say about that. There's two things you can do to prevent disadvantage of decentralization, if you want to avoid centralization, there's two things you can do. You can decentralize it. I think that's the common theme. You can say, well, instead of creating systems that are centralized and control and power is centralized, you should maybe think about decentralization. But why is this drive coming to centralize stuff? Because decentralization often seems inefficient. It's not looking like the shortest road possible. Sometimes a centralization is needed because sometimes other companies are trusted with power. I mean, if you want to give away some control and some power to other companies, that requires a certain level of trust. That's not always working. I mean, gaining power and grabbing power is often one of the reasons that companies exist. So that's the way they work, apparently. Capitalism apparently works that way. So that's the reason why it's existing. So some situations naturally lend itself for centralization, it sees. Why do we address it now? I think I explained it well, but now I really see a problem coming along. I think we should address it, and there's a lot of, if you look at the more forward-thinking team in the IT industry, there's a lot of discussion slowly starting. Maybe we should, and the NSA really catalyzed that. Maybe we should thinking about alternatives. Maybe we should have fully distributed, for instance, version control systems. And this talk on Ned's bachelor, Mike Bayer, who was here last year of SQL Alchemy, he said, I don't want to have GitHub, I just want to have a fully distributed version control. Now the irony is that GitHub itself, Git is a distributed version control system, but GitHub is very much a centralized system. So maybe then, and Git itself is not really used for full distribution. In the end, it all ends up at GitHub, so it ends up in a central place anyway in there, and so the whole notion is gone. So you see these people thinking about, yes, like Mike Bass, I don't want to depend on GitHub anymore. I don't want to depend on one of decentralized because it's too dangerous. They'll change, they'll take decisions that I'm not comfortable with, and I just want to be in control myself. I want to access the stuff that I created myself. I just want it to spread out in the network. And maybe if I'm not fully trusting the network, maybe I can only trust like 50% of the network. There are technologies that can get trust in untrusted environments. I think that's something that the Bitcoin movement really solved. How can you get trust in an untrusted situation? So we really had some breakthroughs as well. So that's the moment where we address it right now. There's real problems coming along. There's real solutions in there as well. And there's really people that have been thinking about this topic for a very long time that start to raise their voices, but also start to build things. So you get tools that are really fully peer-to-peer protocols are being worked on. Like last year, Holger Krekel was here. I spent, most of the night talking to him about this very topic. So next year we wanted to address it. And he's been working on some peer-to-peer protocols and tools and things to build this, to really create it, because there is an alternative. So distribution is the solution, I'd say. So how can you obtain the same goals by distribution stuff? There's only one central thing needed if you have in a distributed system. The one central thing that should be in the system is a shared goal. If every entity within this distributed system has the same shared goal, the same shared vision, then it can steer itself. So the steering of something can be external or internal. It can be external, like the environment has this goal. You see it in nature very much happening. If the environment changes, the organism changes with the environment. It tries to adapt. So it's an environment changing. It's a distributed big system that changes one entity in the whole. But you can also have it like the other way around, like an internal drive for decentralization. So a system that wants to be decentralized by itself or doesn't work if it's centralized. I just mentioned Bitcoin is a very nice example. If you try to centralize Bitcoin, it'll break down because Bitcoin is all built around the fact that it's trusted in an untrusted environment. So it solves the Byzantine generals problem that the Byzantine was a city and it was surrounded by like 4 generals, and one you couldn't trust, but still had to come to an attack to an attack plan. So how do the other generals come to an agreement that they should start attacking? Maybe there was like a spy in the middle and he tried to blow the whole thing up. And how you come to trust in such a situation is something that's being solved in the Bitcoin protocol. And that's interesting because now if you try to centralize Bitcoin again, it'll break down because it doesn't work. You can't get trust in a single, if the power is all within one single entity. So what you see is if you get like Bitcoin, like Mt. Gox, for instance, it breaks down because you try to centralize power in the Bitcoin community. Trust is gone, breaks down, doesn't work anymore. I call it the quantum property. It's like you can have one property for sure, but you can tell nothing about all the other properties. So if you try to centralize it, Bitcoin, it breaks down all the other properties and stops working in the end. So nothing you can say about that anymore. So there's a lot of things to discuss, and I'd like to invite the panel here to kick this off. I throw some ideas, and we have some people here in the audience and on the panel that come from different aspects of life, different jobs and different backgrounds. what problems do you see? What's the future ahead? What are there any tools that we can use? What are the projects going on? Are there other things that I've missed? This is just a initial seed that I've planted. I'd like to kick up the discussion now, and I'd like to hand the seeds to make the next steps and to hand up this. So I put up a couple of things to discuss that we can think about. So I'd like to ask the panel to look at them and kick it up as well, and get it going. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you, Berko, for that short introduction
Yeah, sorry.
of this very easy to grasp topic. So by starting the discussion, I would like to hand the word first to Armin, because I know he's a really intelligent guy with, well, a sharp opinion. So I'm quite interested to see what your general ideas on centralization, decentralization, solutions Berko mentioned, as in the algorithm of Bitcoin, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Oh, well, that's a broad question, I guess.
Good luck.
So I guess as a person that works with databases a lot, I like centralization a ton because it makes everything very easy to understand. You look at something and it's very consistent. Once you have something decentralized, you see a whole range of different problems coming. So the traditional way, I think, in how humans worked is a decentralized system. So like every little town has its own little understanding of the world. And then when that town wants to talk to the other town, they at least have to have some common understanding, because otherwise communication wouldn't work at all. So I think decentralization in itself is just always complex, but it's the nature of how humans work. And I think the whole sort of what we have accomplished in the last 50 years was to introduce centralization. So nowadays I can, I don't know, live in a different town where I grew up, and all my paperwork still works the same, because there's an agreed upon sort of database of where every citizen is registered. So I can just go there and say, like, I was born in this town and now I live here. Can I still have my birth record? And it will arrive because there is a centralized database. So I think there's a lot of value in centralization, and it's very easy. But it does come with the inherent problem that you now need to trust people, that they don't mishandle your data. And I think in what happened in the last 2 or 3 years is that trust in centralized systems has been completely demolished by just a bunch of, not necessarily isolated incidents, but a bunch of incidents that have become very popular. One of which was obviously the NSA thing, which lots of people found disappointing.
Nicely stated.
But before that, there was lots of already existing sort of cracks in the system, with people having problems with how Google and Facebook handle data privacy and all that stuff. But I think that doesn't necessarily mean we have to decentralize everything, at least not without a really good plan of doing it, because otherwise we're just going to go 50 years back where everything was complicated. Because I think it's very nice. Like I come from Austria. I work in the United Kingdom. The total work required for me to go there was to go into a plane. That was literally it. Yeah. And a lot of that worked because there are laws in place that regulate on a European level how things work. And it's a very like the European Union is very centralized. There's the common economic space. You go in there, in the economic space, everything roughly follows the same laws. It's very simple. If we have decentralization, you need every good and every person that goes through borders needs to be checked that it still adheres to the laws and everything in there. It just makes it very complex.
Do you ever see this happening?
Hmm?
Do you ever see this happening? So this big problem Berko introduced us to, it's quite difficult to get to a solution then, quite difficult to get to a trusted, decentralized solution.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's hard.
And maybe somebody else has an idea how to get there in the end. Should we just start something and not become the big Google? Yeah, Afi?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I have a thought there based on what Armin was saying. I mean, the rules that are in place, you don't necessarily have to see them as a centralized system. They're kind of like a protocol that govern how the actors all interact with each other within a system, but the actors are kind of decentralized. So maybe that's one path forward, is we look at laws as a system within which there are laws that govern how people interact, how actors interact with each other, is maybe a way to balance the trade-offs and bring some of some of the advantages of a centralized system with not all of the disadvantages of fully centralized power.
But I think it's also interesting that you refer to United States of America and European Union, because I think there are examples of how you can basically harmonize things on the one end, but keep things distributed on the other end. Because it's not Europe deciding, it's in the end the Netherlands deciding for themselves. And sometimes there's a fight, there's a difference of interest there, which is good.
So it's then a combination of centralized and decentralized.
The problem, I think the main problem with centralization, so on the one end with centralizing things, it's basically everything Armin said, which I totally agree to, makes things more easy. But especially when we're talking about big corporations like Google or Facebook or whatever, if they are centralizing this data, you give them more and more the opportunity to do wrong things with them. So basically, more of it comes down to the trust again, and to how much they care about the ethics of what they do with your data. It's the same for government. So the more data you give them, the more they start to integrate data and centralize it. The more, if they want to, they can discover patterns in what you do in your daily life, and maybe at some point, like design a system that sort of flags certain people that this is sort of strange behavior. We need to investigate this. This is totally not what you want. But then again, the things the centralizing part makes it easier for other people to use the data to do things with it. So it has two sides. And I think one of the important things which is maybe lacking a little bit is the decentralizing issue is basically on a fundamental level, like you make it harder to do the wrong things with the data. But I think also what will be more important in industry, I think, in years to come, is that we become more ethical and more social. So that only making money is a very limited worldview. So you should care about the other things you add to the world, except for just making money and making your investors happy. That's the way I see it. So that's an important part of the future for me as well.
Well, that's really interesting and quite beautiful, and hopefully realizable.
I see more people caring about this.
Yeah. Recently, I mean, INT is one of the NSFX is one of the companies that's in there. They're really focused. They organize all these big parties, but they went like, okay, now we made all this money. We have a social responsibility as well, and that can be a real driver for distributing problems. Because indeed, I mean, centralizing power often leads to things opposite to that, more social awareness and your social responsibility. Nobody, as I said, I don't trust anybody with power in the end. It doesn't work somehow. Nobody and nothing can handle power. So any system that promotes it or is based upon that will result in the wrong people making the wrong decisions in the end. So any system which more individuals have power and say will lead, I think, to more social, more understandable, more realistic, more natural companies, as you would maybe say in the end.
Okay, I have a question, remark from the audience. Reindert.
Thank you. Well, two things I wanted to add. First of all, you were talking about once the government has this data, you don't know when they're going to start doing things with that are not moral, right?
Yeah.
And I had to think about what they're doing here in the city of Groningen. I don't know if they're still doing it, but some time ago there was in the news, they coupled the database with the amount of water and energy you're using at your address with the register of the government's register of who lives where. So that now, whereas the energy company is a private company, they tell the government how much energy you use, and if they see a fluctuation there and it's too big, they'll come around your house and check if someone's living there illegally, or whether you maybe have, how do you say, a weed company growing weed plants in your house, stuff like that. This is a totally immoral thing that's illegal, by the way, but as far as I know, hasn't been challenged yet. And it's happening right under our nose, right?
No. I'm sorry.
So this is not just something that the NSA does, our own government does this stuff. And I think one of the steps I think is necessary is to have all these important structures, these software structures, to open source them, because I want to be able to check what the government does with my data. And right now everything is on closed source systems that are probably being governed somewhere by Microsoft or by some company I don't know about. And I don't know what code is running there, and I don't know what they're doing with it. So one of the things I want to be able to do is check what they're doing and read the code. And I wonder what's happened to the open source everything movement from, I think, a decade ago.
There's probably a backdoor in these systems, though, but what they weren't aware of, but I bet you there is. Yeah.
And of course, there's good sides to being able to check this and to see if things are wrong and to further centralize the world and coming to new products, etc., etc. But I'm first interested in what Armin has to say.
So the only thing I want to add to this is that what all of this boils down to, I think, is a lack of a law that prevents this from happening. Because purely theoretically, if I want to do something bad and the law doesn't stop me, like something immoral and the law doesn't stop me, and I get money out of this, then I would just do it. Well, not me personally, but there are lots of people that would do it. There's a very interesting example I found. I think it was a year ago in London, where they started putting up these recycle bins everywhere. And these recycle bins came from a company that figured that so London has this thing where, I don't know if you've noticed it, but there are no recycle bins in many places. And that was because they removed the recycle bins because the IRA could put bombs in there. So private companies started putting up recycle bins a little bit, and they financed these recycle bins by putting advertisement on the recycle bins. And one of the advertisements they put on, I think last year or 2 years ago, was it had a video screen on it, and the video screen also had a Wi-Fi hotspot. And the Wi-Fi hotspot would sit in permissions mode all the time and would sniff all of the MAC addresses coming by. So if you run with your phone and you come past the same cycle bin a couple of times, and they also know that you were at the recycle bin with the Starbucks over there, then we'll show you a Starbucks commercial. And that was something that's completely uncontrolled. Like, there was nothing wrong with collecting like MAC addresses, but it's creepy. Like, you are at that Starbucks, and then 20 meters over there, there's this commercial handcrafted for you. And that is just a problem of legalization, because this is not a centralized system. It's a very decentralized system. There are maybe 20 recycle bins in an area, but they're creepy enough that when you walk past them, it feels wrong. But this is basically, we don't have a law that prevents this. Like, even if you have completely decentralized data, if you can take two decentralized data sets you got for some reason and you overlap them, and can come up with really terrible and creepy predictions of what people do.
Well, I agree, but just having a law isn't enough. So what the government's doing here, what I talked about, is actually illegal. But that doesn't stop even the government. I mean, what the NSA does is illegal, right? But you still have someone to first see that it's happening and then challenge it. If that doesn't happen, well, it's nice that you have a law, but a law by itself doesn't mean anything, right?
Just one last thing, but the NSA thing, it was actually legal. The illegal part was just that they also spied on American citizens. Yeah. But because we don't actually have a centralized understanding of law, if my government would start spying on Dutch citizens, there's nothing that stops them from doing it. Because there is no law in place that would prevent this. I think maybe the European Union has something. But
yes, but the whole point, I think, that you need law, that means that you have to have some decentralization, because if all power is centralized, then a law doesn't really help, because the people at the top will do whatever they like. Yeah. So things like laws and that kind of prevention only work if you have a certain degree of decentralization, I think.
You have to have distributed accountability.
Yeah.
You have people who are holding each other accountable for their actions. Yeah. And there are some places in the world where you can't do that. You can't hold leadership accountable for their actions. And there are, I think, some companies where you can't really hold them accountable for their actions. There needs to be repercussions for abuse of data. I think a lot of what we're talking about is data or abuse of systems. If there's an actor who has a lot of power, there needs to be some balances to that power. So personally, if I could rant for a second, I'm okay with GitHub because Git is a fantastic system. It's really well designed, and every clone of every repo that everybody has on their hard drives is a fully standalone, full clone of the GitHub repository. And so you have portability, and everybody can vote with their feet. No one is locked in to GitHub, really. The most important data is instantly portable, and GitHub knows that. They know that if they start taking advantage of things and they start abusing what they have, then people will just leave. You can vote with your feet, and that ability to leave is a power we have over GitHub. It's a balance, and it helps. I'm not saying it's the whole solution, but it's part of the solution. It helps keep GitHub in check and prevent them from abusing the power they have, because they know we can just leave anytime.
I think that's an important notion, that instead of having laws that prevent misuse, you should avoid being able to misuse. I think that's key here. I mean, the fact that stuff is centralized in certain, put certain people into things they cannot, they will make misuse of. They can't handle the power, basically. That's what happens. The government can't handle the power because they see new business models. They see new ways of optimizing the business. They see new ways of, whether it's a business, they start optimizing stuff or start to optimize the process or anything. There's all very good reasons from a business perspective, but they get too much power. You should avoid any system that centralizes power in the end. I mean, if you store all data centrally, in the government's a very nice example, then some people have basically too much power, and you know what happens. It will go wrong at a certain point in time. We've seen a couple of examples. There will be way more examples. What is company doing it? What is governments doing it? That will happen. So instead of building laws that try to avoid misuse, you should build systems that not even allow misuse, that not even allow centralization of power, I would say. Social media being the obvious example, that's where it happens, because that's really distributed, that's slowly going from in the distributed environment, centralizing a lot of data and a lot of other things, and immediately start being misused. That's what happens. And so it really turns its ugly head there, but it'll happen in more situations and more cases.
Okay, I have a remark here from Spiros. He's from Greece. I don't know if he has something to say about the European Union or not. We'll hear that.
So in my opinion, actually, the only person you can trust is yourself. So I think we should, as you wouldn't actually share your clothes. So we don't have our clothes in a centralized place and go get them when we need them. We have them in our house. Yeah. So what we should strive for is all the data. We should store them at the user side. So then the user is able to actually say, I want to share this data with these kind of applications. Then he has all the control out of his data. Because we can store actually the advancements in storage is getting better and better. So there's no problem. I don't see any technical challenge of storing a lot of data on users. So then applications like Facebook or Google Plus or a ticketing system or a shopping system, whatever, then you could share whatever you want. The user has the total control over his data. And I don't think we should let the technical challenges to build decentralized systems like this hold us back from actually realizing them.
No. Actually, a funny example is that recently I had created a website, because actually for this ID, I gave this ID, and I've been discussing this thought I said for a very long time already, and there's a notion I call it kennis. It's something I came up with Henk, because in Dutch you have kennis, which is knowledge, and kennis is the ability to do something. To kunnen, let's say that you can do something, right? That you're able to do something. So the combination of kennen and kunnen would be like kennis. Like it's not kennis, not knowledge, and it's not only be able to do something. It's called kennis. So this is the key. That's the name I gave this whole thinking process. And you said, well, I should create a website for it. So I registered the domain kennis.org. And I thought, well, should I host the website? And then you go, okay, should I just? Initially, in the very end, what I would like to have that somewhere close to me, and I'm being this Adams, all these atoms here in this chair, that's me. So obviously, what I would love to is this stuff is as close to me as possible, so that I'm in total control. That anybody who wants to access it, it's here, it's with me. I'm this person, this one. Instead of some representation somewhere of me in the Facebook system, or a representation of me within the Google systems, or within the Apple systems, or on an S3 club bucket, or anything else. It should be as close to me as possible. But it's still undoable somehow. But it can be done. I mean, with an internet that increasingly infiltrates, increasingly connects to the physical world, there's more options for you to also have information in the physical world, or very close to the physical world, really geographically stored. And that's an interesting notion, I think. So I think with all these sensors coming along and all these smartwatches and mobile wearable clothes, anything is being connected, there is an opportunity to really store that physically close to you, you being the atoms that you are in the end. So there are options there. There's a really intriguing changes going on that really will enable such a thing to be possible. I would find it ideal, because I'm really thinking, now, where should I can host my website at this €1 hosting company for €1, and they have some web server. I don't know what's running there. I don't know what to do with it. It's probably broken because it's a very small shop. I can host it S3, but then it's just one more guy that shares all his data through S3. I can do it on Google Plus and Google Drive. Well, the same story again. I don't want to do it because it's my information, it's my data. I want to be absolutely sure that it belongs to me, and anybody, I want to be in control who accesses it or doesn't access it. And, so there are some moves that are really interesting in that respect. There is movement, and it's going that direction, but we're not yet.
Armin.
While it's definitely very interesting to have like ownership of data, not all the data that's relevant to you is actually created by you as a person. Most obvious example there is Facebook. I've found that not actively engaging Facebook means that there's more private information of me on there than if I actively engage with it, because people will just put pictures of me there. And at least once I'm tagged in the picture, I have privacy control settings. So I think in a world where everybody uses social media and shares and creates data, it's almost impossible to be the one source that has ultimate access to give everybody access individually to it, especially because you probably will never have like this one little hard drive you carry around with you until the end of your life, which has all your data on it. It will always be sitting somewhere on a server, which ultimately you kind of have to trust that it will not be. You can do some risk management by splitting into smaller buckets and hiding them in different spaces in the world, but I think it's just it's quite interesting now that we have this discussion happening, because like this has obviously happened over the last 10 years, but now it's like lots of people have this fear that there's something wrong with this and we need to figure out something, but clearly it's a very complicated topic, and it might require some change in thinking of how society deals with data, because I think it's just too hard to assume that I have this little box and all of the stuff in there I have strong control over.
Yeah, but
Well, of course, it is difficult to change now because everybody is using it. It is very convenient. So if nobody feels the pain, it won't change probably. And we are talking about moral things and what should and what should not. But I think there are also reasons why you just can't centralize things, because it just becomes too complicated. The systems we are building becomes more and more complicated just because we can, because we have IT. And if we want to centralize them, then we need to have an overview and need to be able to manage them, or be able to program them in such a way that we can manage them. And that breaks down if you go beyond a certain level of complexity. Then we have to, and of course it is easy, and some things are much more difficult to realize in a distributed way. But I think what you in the end have to accept is that in distributed systems things can go wrong, but they will go wrong locally. And in centralized things will go wrong also, but those have global consequences, which is becoming more and more nasty. So that also might be some reason to decentralize certain systems.
yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm interested in Remco. Remco wanted to comment on Armin.
Well, your example of GitHub, I think it's interesting, because with GitHub, it is based on Git, which in its nature is a distributed system. So basically, the core of the data that you want to have in Git is distributed in its very nature. But then we choose to put it on GitHub because GitHub adds a lot of different things that makes it interesting for us to work with it, which it can do because it's a centralized system. So basically it can make like You can easily fork off a repository, work with it. There's like a reference. You
Browse,
can have people
chat,
basically the whole social element. But if at some point you're like, I don't like this GitHub service anymore, the core data you have just locally, and you can move somewhere else. So this may be an interesting way of looking at the whole problem. I mean, with Git is, of course, it's very technical. It's very oriented, like you do versioning of your source code, so that may not be very much used to the average Joe. But I can maybe see also like social media as the whole Facebook. I have my data, which is mine, and I want to be able to move it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Maybe this can follow the same model as GitHub does.
It could, yeah. But it's not like everything. If the data can move to another, if you control book, GitHub is putting lots of layers on top. And I was talking to Kenneth Rice because he talked about documentation and how do open source projects run. One of the things that I see is that GitHub is not really. It's not ready yet. It does the version control, and that's a few things on top of it. But if you look at how big projects run, how large communities building together on software run, that needs more. It needs a lot of management as well. How do improvement requests come in? What's the format for this request? How do you order them? How do you make the testing on the speed, quality, is huge? I don't know what. Tons of things that are important for larger software projects. That's not really being. I mean, GitHub is getting there, but it's being catered for, but slowly they're trying to get there. These are layers on top of this core, which is in the end your Git repository. The layers on top of it. You can take your core and you can rip your heart out there and say, I'm off to somewhere else, but you're leaving the rest over there, which could be fine, indeed, but at least that's one small way out there.
Yeah,
That's
but
true.
it's to me more the specific idea as a possible
understand
solution. I don't say that I would just easily take my data out of GitHub and go somewhere else, because like you say, there's other things there that are really an added value of the service, like one of the reasons why I go to GitHub in the first place.
Yeah.
But it is an interesting way of thinking about maybe some things should be defined as core, and this should be something that you can extract, and you can just easily go somewhere else, and you can keep it locally if you want.
Yeah, I like the idea. Yeah.
Find a
not everything
centralized
has-
service if you need it.
Yeah, the general idea that maybe not everything you have to be in total control of everything, but the key parts maybe. Then, depending on how important you find it, the rest as well should be under your control. Maybe that could work.
Avi had a remark, and then we'll go to Armin.
There's a lot to respond to, but I'll just try to keep us going forward. It seems to me that one of our biggest problems is social networks like Facebook, like Twitter, and the fact that they're not built on any kind of a core protocol like Git, where you can take your data, you can move it somewhere else, you can take the relationships and move them somewhere else, and it just doesn't exist today, or at least if it exists, it's very esoteric and inconvenient, and ultimately may as well not exist. So, I think the idea of data locality is really fascinating, because if your data is local, you can control it. And in the GitHub example, your Git repository is local, you can control it, as you were saying. Once your data is local, you have control over it, and you have authority, and there's less possibilities for abuse for various reasons. But it's very inconvenient right now, and there's not a lot of protocols that encourage data locality and data portability in various areas. So one of the big problems we have with social networks, such as Facebook, is the network effect, the lock-in. People want to use Facebook because that's where the people are. And it's hard for any other social network or social system to get traction, because people are over there. They're in Facebook. And so until we kind of blaze the trail to some other path where there's some other system where there is a way, there is some kind of portability built into the design of it, and you can move between these different networks somehow. Until we figure that out and make this other place, which is attractive and convenient and fun to use, but also has these other advantages of portability and interoperability and maybe federation, et cetera, there's no alternative. It's not going to work, because the network effect is massive. And so this is a multi-year, long-term thought process to try to figure out, is there some other way, and how can we design it, and can we make it attractive and make it convenient, and slowly shift people in that direction? But it's not something we're going to have an overnight solution to.
And that's, of course, one of the goals of today is to have that thought process to get this going. What Bergo mentioned at the beginning is to really have this as a kickoff in this discussion, and Bergo will, of course, expand on that and how he wants to proceed from here. But yeah, that's a good remark. We need a thought process on that, on how to control or how to not control this. I mean,
I will continue being devil's advocate here. And I think that the GitHub example is actually completely opposite of what you would want for a social network. Because I think one of the most scary things about Facebook is if a mob mentality develops around something and suddenly like your picture gets around shared with everything. So if everybody would, like if you would treat Facebook as a Git repository, and your profile is a Git repository and everybody has clones of it, and you don't have a privacy at all. Like the reason why GitHub works so well for us developers is because a lot of us are open source developers, so when someone else has exactly the same repository as I have, I don't feel bad about it. It's a distributed backup, it's awesome. The reason why a lot of companies feel uncomfortable with Git is because if someone commits an AWS secret into the wrong repository, you don't know if someone will still have a copy of this somewhere, because they might just have, like that repository might forever be, like obviously you should never commit the secret in the first place, but the idea that everybody has a full backup of everything going backwards is a certain liability. So I think there's a natural sort of like trade-off to be made between I can take my data everywhere and I have strong control over it, because once I've given the data to someone and they have all the data, then like the only thing that protects me is if there's a law in place that says you can't actually use the data even though you have it.
But the way I gave the example, I didn't mean that your private data would be an open access to everybody repository like GitHub does it. Obviously, this is a very different set of data, so you would go about it very differently. It's more about the portability, the taking it somewhere else, and the being able to control it yourself and having sort of a way of storing this data that some other party can read and use as well.
But you already put it on the data. You already have the data on the party you no longer trust. Like
yeah.
you now put your data on Facebook. You don't trust Facebook. You're already screwed.
Yeah, but that's a problem that you will have always, I guess.
Well, unless like at the moment there's a lot of discussion going on with data protection where you can force a cloud provider to actually physically erase your data.
Yeah.
So.
But do they do it in the end?
Well, that's
yeah, I mean, and there is this problem always in the end. Sorry, there was a question.
Yeah, I'm kind of taking it back a little bit to the Facebook example, where so it probably begun when ICQ shut down. Jabber was made, and that was a protocol where you're not locked into any single provider. You can jump between it, much like I guess your proposal was with Facebook, where if you're not locked, you have this social effect where if all your friends are there, then you have to be there. Jabber, they kind of solved that problem. Google even jumped into it with GChat, and since Hangouts, they've chopped that off and turned it into something else. Now, Jabber it feels like it's slowly dying. It kind of got a lot of momentum around 2003, 2005, something like that. And yeah, so even if you were to open it up, I don't know how permanent it would be. Also, APIs. Lots and lots and lots of services that are getting built these days are coming with APIs, and you can pull your data, extract them out. You kind of need to know how to code somewhat. So this kind of is happening, but what good is your data if you can't put it into something else? It's, yeah.
But how do you mean Jabber is dying?
Well, it's not dying, but a big portion of the users would have been GChat users, and since Hangouts came along, GChat's been turned off, and that's, I think, legacy mode now, or you lose a whole bunch of features of the Hangouts and the Google Plus thing if you want to stick with the legacy, if it's even offered anymore, I'm not sure. And Yeah, it's all of the providers. It has this decentralized ability to, you choose who you want to host your account with, and they're all kind of interconnected with one another. Somebody who's on GChat doesn't need to, isn't restricted to only speaking to people on GChat. They can speak to anybody within the network. So it's this.
I think specifically, I mean, Google really jumped into the whole Jabber thing and they added new things to it. But for example, the whole video stuff and the whole media online.
There were restrictions.
There were no real standards for that back then. So basically, Google made plugins and made it available to the world.
Turned it into something new.
But now that's changing. I mean, in all the new browsers, there's new standards for doing this kind of real-time video over the web. So I guess that it's open enough that if Google somehow fucks up and people don't want to use it anymore, that someone else can jump into that, like people did when ICQ just went.
But then you'll be starting again. Whereas if it had have stayed on this Jabber protocol and the protocol grew with Google, then you wouldn't have to start again with trying to drag all of these users back into the network.
But there are reasons why people start liking things like iMessage and Hangouts. It's because you connect one device, you connect the other device, you have access to both your messages and you know all the history. And that inherently is against the federated protocol. Because what good is a federated protocol if everybody keeps a history of everything? You just no longer have ownership of the data either. Yes, you can go from one provider to another, so that's a certain amount of decentralization. But if what you want to protect is the data, then you leave footprints behind everywhere. And I think with Hangouts, like once they switched over from Google Talk to Hangouts or whatever it was, like the adoption rate got really high. I definitely didn't use Google Chat before.
I think that the adoption rate was really high because they kind of forced people into it, because if you want to be a YouTube user, you must have a Google Plus account. They federated a whole bunch of services, not just the chat stuff, into it.
Two quick thoughts. What you just said, Armin, is very insightful. That the data, there's a lot of data you can't control, and you could say, oh, well, what's the point then of a federated protocol and if it's just a distributed system when there's still a data footprint you're leaving somewhere behind that you can't control. You lose control. And I think that we have to accept that. In a distributed system, the value of a distributed system is in relationships. You're interacting with other people and other parties and other actors, and there's value you're getting out of that relationship, and there's a footprint you're leaving. That other party knows something about you, there's some result of that relationship, and you can't control that. That is part of being in the world, and you have to interact with parties that you have some minimum level of trust, only interact with them to the degree that you have some level of trust, and accept that they are going to do with their takeaway from whatever they take away from that relationship, they're going to do whatever they want with it, and you have to hope that they're not going to betray your trust. And you have to evaluate, be consistently always saying, well, this entity I'm interacting with, how much do I trust them? How much of a footprint am I going to allow myself to leave on their side for them to do whatever they're going to do with it? And I just want to respond to this remark over here. The Jabber is, I think, a fantastic and excellent example to look at and just to keep in mind here and say, Jabber has technically a lot of the technical attributes we want out of a decentralized system, and yet adoption didn't really take off. So I don't have an answer, but I think it's a great question, which is to say, and we should keep it in mind, and we should always be saying, if we are going to continue to try to find the right path forward here, we should be saying, let's look at that example and say, why didn't that work? And how can we do better going forward? How can we learn from that? Yeah. So I'm really glad you brought it up.
Yeah. Totally is. And there's an interesting thing what you said, you leave some footprints in the world. Henk came up with that one, that philosopher Emil Kant said, das Ding is nicht zu kennen. Without any context, there's no way you can define it. You don't know what an object is unless you see it in context, right? So the context is really defining for whether the object is like a social conversation or it's being you and you are being defined by your surrounding as well. So knowledge about you and who you are is by your kids, your parents, your friends, and whatever, the city you live in, the town you're part of, the social network that you're part of. So indeed, a lot of about who you are is in your surrounding, and there's no problem at all. That's also distributed, and that's also somewhere in the network or somewhere, and it might be centralized. But that comes back a bit to the GitHub discussion. But key points of that, maybe you want to take more control of key aspects, be more in control of some aspects, while other aspects which might be more in the network, you'll find that that's in the network. And it's not a solution, it's not an answer, but something that, let's keep that in mind as well. Dat ding is niet te kennen without the context in the end. So what does this mean? What is really belongs really to me? What is something that is partly for me, but it's also part of the environment? And I don't have the answers, I know, but I see the discussion and I see the problems and I see some solutions.
But there is partial control there already. Huh? I mean, yes, you leave a fingerprint, you leave traces wherever you go in the physical world too. The problem, of course, in the internet age is that it's like sort of an indefinite history that people can keep on you and do stuff with that maybe you don't want. Then again, you can decide to encrypt your chat with the other party on the remote end. So anything that's in between has a record on something. But if you do it well enough, then they can't really do anything useful maybe with that record. But then you lose partially the services that were offered to you, like searching in that history from a different device that didn't send the original message. So that's basically already partially decisions that you can make to mitigate some of these problems. But you lose on the other end.
Yeah.
I think one problem is that I think a person understands very well that if they walk through a sandbox, they leave footprints behind. But I think an average user does not understand at all and doesn't even have the technical ability to understand what happens if he uses a feature of a software application. And maybe one way to progress forward is to give a basic education to people. For instance, we have these commercials on television that they put in the seatbelts. Maybe that sort of stuff will be necessary going into the future in regards to what it means to use online services of any sort. Because not everything actually, like for instance, there are lots of, like obviously Facebook doesn't care that much about your privacy probably because it's not really their interest. Their interest is data. But on the other hand, your bank is very much interested that you as a customer protect your account because otherwise you lose the money. So maybe there will just be some sort of education campaign necessary to teach people.
I very much agree that public awareness is really important here because without it, it's very hard to affect social change. And once we have some level of public awareness, then we can work towards a shared social contract, a social compact of expectations between the different actors and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. You know, we talked a little bit about law here, and one of the points made was that we need laws that help us regulate ourselves. But there are a lot of laws in the books that just get ignored because they're just not really relevant anymore to the social compact. And the social expectations of each other is a lot of times what enforces those laws and makes them actually living and valid and still real and meaningful. And so if we can work our way towards that, then maybe that will start getting us towards a place where we have a better understood and better enforced set of trade-offs between all these tensions around centralization and decentralization and power and data.
And just to add one little, tiny thought. I think one reason why XMPP or the Trevor protocol didn't take off was because it was cumbersome for users to use. Because I've tried to use it for a really long time when people started using it as an alternative to ICQ, and the fact that there is no discovery of people and that you need to understand like this is a Trevor resource on a different server and there's all kinds of weird things. That's just a side effect of decentralization and it's a little bit annoying as a user. But maybe if the expectation of the public is going to be that distributed systems should become the norm and not like the exception, then these sort of kinks will be better understood and will be accepted. But right now, just firing up WhatsApp is convenient.
Okay, I have a few remarks from the audience here, and I actually want to spend I want to spend 5 minutes on breaking up Microsoft. What would that look like if we decentralize or have a distributed version of Microsoft? And then I guess we come to the end of the discussion where Becco will do the finish up and tell his future plans. But first, Jasbir.
Well, we only have a few, I think we only have...
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so far we have mostly talked about one side of centralization, which is social media, Facebook, Google Talk. Let's also look on the other side of it, which is basically all the financial institutes, how they use all this centralization information. For example, all the banks, all the insurance companies, they have a centralized database to find out all of your credit history, your health history. Imagine, banks do not have any way to find centralized information. They start giving 3 mortgages to one person without knowing what he has right now, how's his credit history, everything. What will happen? Banks will go down, and it's when the banks go down, it's not only the banks who go down. All the people associated with the banks also go down. So it definitely also has a lot of positive side of it. So it depends like what kind of information, how effectively, securely that information is used, as well as how the risk is mitigated there. So for example, it's a centralization information. How do you mitigate the risk? How do you distribute the risk associated with that particular information? So yeah, we definitely have a lot of factors associated with that kind of information. So just a comment basically. Yeah.
Another comment from the audience.
Yeah, I just wanted to react to Armin, because you've made two remarks basically. You've said at one point, I think we should have laws, and another point you said, I think we should have education. And I think you're right on both counts, but Berko at the beginning also said, well, you should make some kind of abuse technically impossible, right? Because I think thinking about educating the public maybe about encryption and about protocols isn't going to work practically. And I think if you look at, for example, there's this initiative called You Broke the Internet, where you can see this huge list of different open source initiatives that are trying to address problems with the current internet protocols that, because for example, HTTP and TCP/IP they're not secure by design. And we should maybe redesign them to make the exploits that the NSA did less harder or maybe even impossible to do, right? So that's just on a protocol basis. But if you have like a more secure internet where you don't leave footprints if you visit a site, then you only start leaving footprints the moment you decide to log in and enter a contract where you say, okay, now you can gather my information because now we have an understanding. But what we don't have right now is like this general framework that is secure by default, that can't be abused. And I think that's where we should go.
I think maybe it's a little bit of a naive pipe dream. This not necessarily, but I don't know where that quote came from, but someone compared this to basically the TSA checks, where, like, yeah, you should make it impossible to bomb a plane by, you make it statistically more secure, but like a lot of the things that people don't do, they don't do for other reasons than it being impossible. Like I don't kill you not because it's impossible, but because I don't have any benefit from it. So maybe
nice to know, I mean.
We'll go away,
So maybe it's not necessary to completely prevent it from a technical level. Maybe it's just to not give people incentives to do it. Maybe there's something you can balance it against. Because, I mean, the Heartbleed SSL bug thing I found hilarious because it was the first time that SSL was less secure than not SSL. And SSL became so widespread that all of a sudden a software bug like people protect their little things that were completely unnecessary to protect from encryption maybe. So maybe not everything doesn't have to be a technical solution, especially if it's a very complex one like SSL.
In that particular case, I mean, a secure transport is not going to help you when you can securely hand over, you can securely interact with another party, but then that other party, they have free agency to do what they want once you've interacted with them. So the secure transport is only a small part of the puzzle, and I think having shared expectations and a shared social contract is important to get there. And it may take a long time, and it may be tricky, but it's possible, I think, for us to get there.
Okay, I have one final remark here from the audience, and then I go back to Berko for finish it up.
Hi. I just want to point out that for browsers, there's already a way to do peer-to-peer communication and to be owner of your own data, like use the browser's database. This WebRTC is a Google project originally, I thought. Well, I think all we need is to build the tools to create like a peer-to-peer web framework that gives users control of their own data, and to establish a trust between users. How do you know what the other end is? How can I authenticate between to users you don't trust.
Yeah.
I think that's the whole problem right now. There are no tools yet to build such a thing. So
Yeah, but I agree. But what you see now, that was the beginning of my talk, and I think we should wrap it up at 1:30 starts a new sessions. But there are slowly but surely there's tools coming along. There's understanding. I think the whole notion. You understand that this is a problem domain, but there is also solutions, and there's an increasing number of people thinking about it and building tools and building technologies. And becoming aware of the problems and I mean, sometimes it will be hard, sometimes it will be impossible, but at least we should, I mean, nobody knows which footprints they are leaving, and nobody knows what the consequences are. If we slowly start thinking about these things and see what tools are coming along, we can at least make a conscious decision in how we build our future and be part of it instead of it happening to us. So I'd like to thank you all for being here and following the discussion. This is meant as a seed to plant. Let's goodness.org, where you can go, not today, but after the weekend. We'll put up a manifesto and all that kind of stuff. We can continue the discussion. We'll collect some data and some thoughts about this whole. It's a big project, but there's a lot. It's an important one, if you ask me. So I'd like to thank the panel here. Thanks, guys, for joining us.
Indeed, can I have a big round of applause for the guys here? And you get a present.